This is Live Music Capital, a podcast about the business and politics of making music in Austin, Texas, and beyond. Live Music Capital is powered by Austin City Jams. Now, here's your host, Eric Leikam.
Thank you, Mark Waldy, and welcome once again to Live Music Capital. I am Eric Leikam. Things are starting to get interesting as South by Southwest ramping up, as well as the Austin Music Awards. And coming up on this edition of Live Music Capital, we'll preview what's on tap for this year's South by Southwest Festival and Conferences. We'll hear about what the Austin Music Commission has been talking about regarding musician pay and something called Agent of Change. And we'll see what the Texas Music Office, which has just turned 30 years old, is up to. All that coming up now on Live Music Capital. At the most recent meeting of the Austin Music Commission, they discussed the issues of musician pay. There had been talk of some kind of standardization of music pay, such as a requirement to have contracts or to charge cover, particularly in areas such as the Red River District downtown. Rebecca Reynolds is with the Music Venue Alliance, and she thought of a different strategy.
What I propose is to get clusters of venues together, because you have different genres of venues. You have venues that speak to different crowds. And while I understand that the cover charge is an issue, I think to Doug's point, what we at NMVA have steered away from is dictating to businesses how they operate, because some businesses understand their clientele well, and they understand that they will pay more inside if they don't pay outside. And some venues who maybe cater more towards tourists don't have that issue. So I think it's a healthy conversation to talk about cover, but I would caution against requiring it or requiring a certain fee. And then as far as coming up with a standard, I said this last week, and I have to say it again. I hope that we can get past this sort of like, we're going to use this money to hold over the venue's head. Like, I just feel like there's a lot of information that venue owners could bring to this conversation, and they're kind of scared to do it because the common sort of atmosphere so far has been that they're at fault somehow. So what I would like to do is have just some cluster conversations with musicians and venue owners, successful venue owners who have been doing it for a long time, and hear from them how they decide currently what to pay. What kind of variables do they look at? And then if they had more money, several of them had told me what they would do with that money if they had more. And they've all said, we would book more bands, we would pay more, we would provide more opportunities. And so I think if we can kind of put on the record what the venue owners are already using, and then find out from them, what would you do if you had more money? That there's a lot of really good information to be had there.
That segued into a discussion of Agent of Change and the Austin Sound Ordinance, which means that in a dispute, whoever was there first will get preferential treatment. One of the most notable recent Agent of Change cases was when the Westin Hotel sued a club on 6th Street called the Nook because their bass frequencies were disturbing hotel guests. The Nook had been there long before the hotel, but the hotel sued and then dropped the suit because Agent of Change was on the side of the club. The hotel ended up adding additional soundproofing to their property. Under Agent of Change, they should have done that as they were under construction. Reynolds says she's been advocating for Agent of Change to be included in the new Land Development Code rewrite.
So the whole point of it would be to separate music venues from bar nightclub. So right now, all venues per our Land Development Code are considered bar nightclub. And our point is that we want to start building some protections in our code without necessarily allowing for more bar nightclubs everywhere. Or raising the standard for new development next to a bar nightclub where a venue might need it when a bar nightclub inside doesn't. So the point is to create maybe some tax incentives, some agent of change incentives. There's several ways in which we can use, making a distinct land use for a live music venue from a bar nightclub.
Jared Rutherford, who is general manager of the Rainy Street Bar Half Step, explained how they operate.
The venue covers the production costs. They pay for the engineer, and then we pay a guarantee. It's not a lot, but it's decent, and probably more than, I would say, 80% of the guarantees out there, especially during the week. And what that venue has benefited from is pulling people in off the street and creating this atmosphere that music is accessible, for better or worse, because I do realize that we live in a society where music seems to be a given, and it's no longer a commodity. Whereas I think if we were to remove music out of everywhere, public spaces, it'd be a pretty bland world to live in. So we need to re-commodify music. I think a gold star standard of venues would be great, so that way we can establish qualifications for what that means, paying a decent rate, covering production costs. Even we don't hear a lot from sound engineers. We're just hear from musicians, but I know a lot of struggling sound engineers that have a hard time getting what they deserve. $150 might seem like a decent rate, but for the amount of schooling and effort that goes into learning the craft of sound engineering, that's nothing. So I would like to keep this conversation rolling.
The commission also learned from Rutherford that venues can get into trouble with police even though they're not violating the law.
What we ran into 2 weeks ago was law enforcement coming out and ticketing every venue and bar that had any kind of music playing. So this is a $500 citation, Class C misdemeanor. If you get 4 of those, I believe within 45 days, you can have your permit revoked. So this is a very serious issue. I don't know what's next for the agent of change and the sound ordinance. We are at Half Step, have an engineer that cares and goes above and beyond the call of duty. He is talking with David Murray, the city's sound engineer consultant, what are the laws with the sound ordinance. We were operating within that, and turns out the enforcement can come at any time, and it doesn't matter whether you're operating within the realm of the law. They will ticket you first and ask questions later. Even with the ticketing process, they made mistakes on the ticket, which we believe that will get it thrown out. But I believe we're in a new era where we are seen as that sound, just even at an appropriate level, is seen as a nuisance. And what we thought was complaint-based is turning into APD taking their own initiative and enforcing without complaints. Rebecca looked at the complaint log for 311 and APD and found that on the night we were ticketed, there were no complaints. So we need that transparency.
Did they take readings?
They did not take readings. So, and our engineer has a decibel reader on his phone. He takes readings throughout the night, documents this in his phone to make sure that when the APD does show up, he can say, hey, we at no point went over. If we did, it was probably someone else, like a motorcycle going by or, a loud group walking by. So that is what we're dealing with now, and it's very frustrating. It's discouraging to the venues because they're now having to go to court to fight these tickets that are not valid.
The commission could make a recommendation to Austin City Council to look into how the sound ordinance is being enforced. Commercial music contributes about $1.6 billion annually to the economy of the live music capital. The Texas Music Office has just celebrated 30 years of existence. The TMO functions as a clearinghouse of information exchange and advocacy for musicians and commercial music in the state. I sat down recently with Director Brendan Anthony about the office and its mission on its anniversary.
I think it is a statement about
the enormous value that our state places on commercial music industry here in Texas. We are the only state that has a music office that functions the way this one does. We don't look at tourism first. We look at, from our perspective, in my opinion, since I'm sort of directing the thing right now for the past 5 years, I look at our role as the Texas Music Office to create an environment where people can create jobs, create small business, stable small business, and create unique things. And they will be things that will draw people in naturally. Tourism will be a byproduct of us creating a common sense marketplace for these people to create. We're not involved in creation. We are attempting to give communities and our state as a whole tools so that our people, our constituents, can be successful. So I think having a music office supported the way we are for as long as we have been is a pretty solid statement about how Texas feels about the commercial music industry here. I'm personally honored to do the job. The 5 years I've been here, I've seen tremendous growth. I think the music office can play a central role in some of the directions we've already covered, and I'm really proud that we've taken that those steps to position ourselves that way.
One of the things musicians and music pros have long lamented is the lack of music industry presence in the state and in Austin. But baby steps are being taken to lure industry here. Case in point, the establishment of performance rights organization BMI opening an Austin office. Anthony is hopeful for the future.
In the next year or so, I hope for some really positive announcements. So BMI took about 3 years to create that expansion. These are big ships that we're going after, not little things that might not really turn the needle. So we're looking for big expansions, and those take serious time. We're focused on a couple of other opportunities right now that are years in the making, years in the works. I hope to make announcements about those this year or next. I think for a long time, this is not criticism, I think it's a fact. I think for a long time we've talked about the lack of industry infrastructure. We've bemoaned it. We've pointed it out. But intentionally, we've never taken steps towards fixing that problem. I think over the last 5 years, we have taken steps out of this office to fix that problem, and BMI is a good example of trying to make that change. You mentioned that it's baby steps. I think incremental progress is the only kind of progress you should make. We've seen examples of progress that's made at too full tilt, too big of a footprint at once, unsustainable growth, and that's not what we're after here. We're working towards incremental growth of something that in several years we can look back and say has changed people's lives, has created opportunities for people to monetize intellectual property out of this city, Austin, out of the state, Texas, in a way that we've never seen before. And that's our goal. We want to be the group that's not talking about it, we're doing it. So we work in that role. As a friend of mine who works in this effort alongside me said, we're using shovels right now. We got our heads down, taking stabs at it. We're going to look back behind us, and we'll have the Panama Canal behind us in a few years. And that's how we're approaching it.
For those who wish to become better at music business in their efforts, Anthony says more music people need to connect with his office.
I think they should avail themselves of all the services that groups like Austin Music Foundation offer and that the BMI office offers. There are opportunities for songwriting collaboration in the town that exist, and people should avail themselves of those. They should spend time creating relationships in other places too, but we would always encourage people to keep their business here. The connectivity that our office offers is free. It's widespread. We know a ton of people, and our service is free to people. So we offer our time, our information, our connections at no charge. So, people that are interested in branching out, connecting with different parts of the industry, connecting with similar parts of the industry that what they're operating in can come talk to us at absolutely no charge. We work for them. So I wish people would avail themselves of our service a little bit more as well. I think songwriters or people who write and create should always stay up to date on changes in laws that negatively or positively affect them, because ultimately they are small business owners. So I know we get caught up in the conversation about art versus commerce quite a bit,
Right.
and music as a business occasionally gets used in the pejorative, possibly. But I think that we all have to be very realistic that if we were doing this to support ourselves and our families, that it is a business, and that songwriters and managers and agents who work with those people should be as up to date on changes in rules and laws that affect them one way or the other as they can possibly be. Those things are changing all the time.
Anthony points to recent sweeping legislation in the Music Modernization Act and how that's evolving. Since technology always outpaces legislation, his office helps tech companies stay up and out of trouble as much as possible, but cautions if you use music that's not your own, be prepared to pay for it. One of the other issues he's watching is the change in the way independent contractors do business in California, a bill called AB 5, which could severely impact musicians there. Author Ari Herstand is fighting that legislation now. And while the current Texas business climate does not appear to be heading down that road, nonetheless, Anthony is watching it.
I'll say this about the thing that happened in California is that when events like that happen, when legislation like that's proposed anywhere, it is sort of like, rubbing against the grain of something that we understand pretty well. Mm-hmm. We ought to sit up and take notice of it. You're right. I don't think we are the kind of state that will approach independent contractors that way, but I can't say for certain. So, you or we, all of us in the business, should pay attention when things like that crop up that are a little bit against the grain. Pay very close attention to them, see how they play out. And just because we've gotten used to doing things one way for a long time doesn't mean that they can change on a dime and we'd have to get used to them. But I think if we examine a change in the fundamental way that independent contractors of any stripe get paid, and we're seeing it change, in a 180 sort of degree way, we ought to be giving that a really close look. Our musicians are used to negotiating a rate with an entity that hires them, if it's a venue or some other corporate group, and they negotiate that rate and they decide how they're going to pay their people who work for them. Mm-hmm. And they should follow all the tax guidelines that are out there, and they ought to issue government created documents so those people can withhold, et cetera. I mean, that's the way the world works. Mm-hmm. But if we fundamentally change the way these people are paid and then pay their side people, then I think there'll be some unnecessary friction. I think there'll be some folks who have built a business on something that might look like shifting sands almost, and we really don't want to see that happen. So we pay close attention to it.
Anthony says Austin and Texas are especially innovative when it comes to tech and funding mechanisms like the proposed Austin Live Music Fund. No doubt the Texas Music Office will continue to be a vital part of the music industry in the live music capital. The 34th South by Southwest Conference and Festival descends upon Austin March 13th through the 22nd. Once again, the festival celebrates the convergence of the technology, film, and music industries. I'll be there to cover what I can for the podcast. South by Southwest has announced the latest round of keynote and featured speakers. Among the latest notables are 2020 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross of Nine Inch Nails. They'll be there with Emmy Award-winning executive producer and writer Damon Lindelof to discuss their collaboration on the HBO series Watchmen. Texas musician Annie Clark, a.k.a. St. Vincent, will be paired up with actress Carrie Brownstein in conversation. Roger Waters of Pink Floyd will be joined by filmmaker Michael Moore. Judd Apatow will interview Stephen Colbert. Director Spike Jonze will discuss his latest film, a Beastie Boys documentary. Ozzy Osbourne and his son Jack will be hosted by comedian Jim Norton. Even Kim Kardashian West is a featured speaker on criminal justice. That is but a sampling of the speakers and programs going on at this year's South by Southwest, which is far and away the biggest thing going on every year in Austin. And that is going to do it for this edition of Live Music Capital, powered by Austin City Jams. Thanks to Brendan Anthony and his staff at the Texas Music Office for their time and help. If you have any questions or would like to sponsor a future podcast, please reach out to me via my website, ericleikam.com. I'm also accepting donations via PayPal at ericradio@yahoo.com and Venmo at eric-leikam. On behalf of our announcer, Mark Waldy, thank you for listening, liking, commenting, and sharing. And we'll be back soon with another edition of Live Music Capital.